Okay, I think I'm going to start. Hi, I'm Lena Raine, and if you're here, you might know that I wrote the music for this little game called Celeste. Came out a year ago. I've done a bunch of other things, too. I wrote music for this game called Hackmud, my own game called Escape, which is a little interactive novel. I did some Delta rearrangements, that was cool. And we've had some arrangement albums of Celeste. This is just my website. I'm just kind of going through. I don't have any fancy slides or anything. I did a cool, Wandersong's a really cool game. You should check out that. I did an arrangement for the remix album. And I also worked on Guild Wars 2, an MMO that is currently still running, and working on that, working with ArenaNet in a contract capacity now. I used to work for them as a designer, so I was actually at the company, employed not as a composer at all, but still somehow being able to write music because I came up with the idea of, hey, why don't I write music? And they were like, yeah, sure. There's more to that story, but basically what I wanted to do, I had a kind of vague idea when I initially wrote the description for this panel. You may have read that in the hopes of hearing my insights about writing music while working at a company. I'm actually not going to do that. What I decided to do instead is I want to just kind of write some music on stage and just kind of talk through it and see how that goes. I have my just kind of little portable setup here. I've got Ableton, which is my DAW, digital audio workstation of choice, and just set up to a project where I've just kind of set up some just blank tracks with some synths and some sample libraries kind of loaded up. And we'll just kind of see how much I can do in an hour and just kind of describe what I'm doing, why I'm making the choices I'm making, and towards the end, if y'all have any questions for things that I've skipped over or just other questions about how I write music or come up with the sounds that I do, we can do that. So if that sounds cool, I'm gonna kind of start working on a track that I have no idea what I'm going to write. So we're gonna kind of start from bare minimum here. We just have, so this is massive. This is my sort of go-to synth. I wrote a blog post a little bit ago just kind of going into how I made some of the sounds for Celeste, mostly because I was just, kind of salty that people kept referring to it as chiptune, when it's, I mean, that's a drum. That's not even massive. I mean, you can, this is kind of chiptuney, but that's kind of starting with a square wave / sawtooth wave. It's right in the middle here. So you can kind of go super square or super saw. And that's just kind of the waveform that it generates. And these are all oscillators. So they're making sounds that are creating waveforms, and then you play them at certain pitches and they sound different. So you can kind of go through a whole bunch of different shapes. You've got a sine wave, which is a little smoother. And then a triangle wave, which is really fun for basses. And you might actually recognize that from like the NES chiptune stuff. All of the basses for NES chiptunes is basically triangle waves. So very, very simple sounds. So the fun part about building up a synth is I just kind of get to figure out what the bass oscillators, the bass sounds that I want to work with are, and then kind of build it up from there. So I want to do kind of a pad, maybe just start kind of smooth, not too energetic. So, and we're going to start kind of low intensity here. So this is kind of starting from that as a bass. Let's just kind of start with just that. And what I want to do is we go into the envelope here, this is kind of shaping the sound. So we've got the attack, which kind of determines how fast it comes up. And then the decay, how fast it goes down, and sort of what the levels are that it stays at once you get to that point in the shape of the note that you're playing. Kind of got a nice little patty kind of sound there, so I like that. Let's keep that going. And then the most important part of any music that I write is I put lots of reverb on it, because it just makes it sound nice. And we can kind of play with that. I can just kind of hold these notes here and then just kind of start tweaking the parameters. We've got big ol'. Take that up an octave. And that lasts for quite a while. So I'm going to go into the second FX and just kind of make this, I'm going to make this a little bigger. So I'm going to go to the chorus, and that kind of just gets the stereo spread going a little bit. And kind of gives some weird pitch stuff going on. This is all technical terms for those of you taking notes. So that's cool. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start to sort of build up the other parts of the sound. So I kind of like where it's at. And one thing I can do to help build that out is I can record a little bit and just kind of loop that over and over again. So I'm going to just record a chord here. I kind of like going with this suspended chord here. Just no commitment to whether it's major or minor, just kind of. Just a nice little chord here. I feel like I'm kind of Bob Ross talking you through Happy Little Trees. Just a happy little chord. That's kind of how it is. That's kind of how you write music. Just making landscapes, especially if you're making background music. You're kind of coming up with what is the aural landscape that you're going with. And I'm gonna turn off that click because that sucks. And then we're going to loop that. And then the fun part about writing music is that you get very sick of the same thing over and over again because you're just hearing it constantly. And I feel bad for anyone that is in the same room as me writing because, well, that's all of you now. So you're just going to listen to this for a while I kind of figure it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of actually make the decay on this a little longer and kind of make it go down a little farther. So while it plays, you can kind of hear it going down in volume after it hits the highest volume. So it's kind of making a little pulse, a little sort of chord pulse going on. And then I'm going to start making the sound a little more complex. So I'm going to get a sawtooth wave added onto here, pretty low intensity, and I'm going to make it go down an octave. I might actually go down 2 octaves. That's already sounding pretty cool. And then you can do some fun resonance things if you get, say, a sine wave and then pitch it up. Not just an octave, but an octave and a half, essentially. Not really. But it's kind of creating some overtones that give it sort of a more glassy quality to it. I'm just going to turn this up a little bit. And because it wouldn't be one of my synths without a little bit of noise on here, just to kind of make it sound a little lo-fi-ish sound to it. It's not actually low fidelity, but we're kind of faking it. Let's see. Kind of a little tape hiss on there. And crush it a little bit. And you can kind of just do whatever you want with this. Sometimes I just go in and just mess with knobs until it sounds different, and that's definitely one way to do this. There's the intellectual way, which is knowing exactly like what the parameters you want to achieve are, and then there's the fuck it, let's just do something way, which is just mess with everything until you come up with something that sounds cool. And that's, the latter is usually kind of what I go with. And then I learn on the way, which is important. So that's just one chord, one instrument going on here, but I'm kind of liking how it's sounding. So let's stop playing that for right now. And let's see. Let's do. So I'm going to just kind of make a little basic progression here with a moving bass line. I'm doing a lot of stuff without hearing it right now because I kind of know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of moving the bass down. So you've kind of, this is something I end up doing a lot, and I catch myself sometimes if I catch myself doing this too much, which is kind of doing a very similar kind of thing where I've got this moving bass line and the same kind of chord on the top. And that kind of creates a nice, just sort of thoughtful, sentimental kind of vibe to it. And I like to write that kind of music, so I kind of go with that. And I also don't know entirely how this sounds because I'm not listening to it on like speakers that are right in front of me or like headphones or anything. So I'm kind of just going off of what I'm hearing way over there. So forgive me if this sounds just absolutely awful. I'm going to lower the tape a little bit, lower the amp on the third oscillator, and well, we kind of got a little bit of a progression here. Keeping it simple, not doing anything too fancy because I don't want to like have to think too hard right now while I'm doing all of this in front of an audience for the very first time. So I'm just going to kind of go with this very basic little chord progression, just kind of bass going down and back up again. I might actually speed this up a little bit. I'm going to get kind of like a little bit of a drum thing going here. I can barely hear this. You can hear my keyboard more than you can the kick drum, but I'm going to kind of do a thing here with the kick where we are going to not do a whole lot of drum stuff, but I'm going to kind of put a little delay on it so we kind of get a little reverberant drum emphasis going on. So we're going to go into audio effects, and I'm going to get just a little sort of delay going. My favorite go-to ping pong delay, which everyone makes fun of me for. Let's see, what's... kind of got a little bit of a delay going on here. That's fun. That just kind of keeps going for a while. I'm not going to use that. Maybe that. Sorry, I'm just like extremely talking to myself now as I'm doing this, so apologies if I'm not super entertaining. Let's see. It's kind of a little crisp snare thing going on. All right, so let's try something here. So that's cool. And then, because I know I played that terribly, I'm going to quantize a little bit. And I usually kind of go in here with so when you're quantizing, which is basically dragging all of the things you've just played into the sort of grid of the tempo and making sure that everything kind of sounds right on the beat. And the fun thing with Ableton is you can kind of set like a percentage of how much you actually want it to quantize. So I try to go for a more sort of human approach. I don't want everything lining up like a robot. So I set it around 80% or so, and that might sound good, so we'll see. I can turn this off. Cool. So that's coming together. So what I'm going to do now, I'm kind of feeling like I want to have some sort of like little repetitive phrase kind of coming up. It's kind of fading up while all this is playing out. So it's sort of starting with these chords and a little bit of drum. I could just let the chords play out by themselves as kind of an intro sort of thing, but for the sake of brevity, we're just going to kind of come right in with the drums here. But I'm going to go into my second massive instance here, and I'm going to start from scratch yet again and it's being very laggy. And we're going to make a different type of synth. This one can be a little cruder. Let's go with crude. Let's see what that sounds like. That's still the drums. So that's kind of a sound to start with. Sure, I might layer that with something else also, just to kind of give it some crispiness. I want this a little crispy. Still technical terms, for those of you paying attention. I tend to refer to things like food, I guess, when it comes to audio, like juicy and beefy and like crispy. I don't know why. I think it was my teachers. Like I had a lot of jazz teachers in college, and like they kind of go with those very like sense-driven terminology when it comes to what audio sounds like. Because you kind of, music and audio are all kind of ephemeral things, so you kind of have to come up with some sort of lingo to describe what you're hearing that's not, a literal description of it, because that would be a little too difficult to put together. So anyways. take it up a little higher octave. And what we can do, since we're going to be sort of playing a repetitive phrase as these initial chords come together, and so I want it to kind of evolve a little bit. What I like to do is I put together sort of two different synth profiles that something can have. And so you put a whole bunch of stuff on, I'm pointing at the screen, you can't see that. I can point with my cursor, there we go. So down here, there's macros, and so you can set a whole bunch of parameters to one specific macro, which becomes a little knob that you can adjust while you're playing, or you can automate it in Ableton or whatever program you're using. So if I want to, say, go from something like that to, so a little more present sound, you can kind of tone down the intensity here and then set the range that this macro is affecting, and then as you kind of change this knob here, you are going from that sound to that sound. And that's fun. That's a lot of fun stuff that I like to do with music, and it creates a lot of fun variety to the sound that you can either automate by, that's my website again, you can either automate by, programming it in specifically, or you can do LFOs, which kind of affect those parameters automatically. I apologize, I'm just kind of breezing through all of this stuff, which is, I think, why I'm leaving room for questions at the end, if you want me to go into something very specific. But I'm just going to keep going with this. So, it's actually this synth that I'm working on. Let's play through this. This amp was set to 0, so I wasn't actually even hearing it. Cool, I like that. So I'm just gonna do very quick and dirty recording session for this. What I might do actually is get another one of these oscillators, take it down an octave. Let's see. Yeah. And then do the same thing to this. Oops. So that we are affecting all three oscillators at once. So let's do this. Just figuring out what I actually want to play here. It's triplets, so that's going to make things fun. I was way off there. And then you get to witness me completely fuck it up. But that's all part of the process. No one's perfect. I don't think Bob Ross talked about fucking things up, though, in those words. Sure, that's something. So we'll work with that. The fun thing to note is that, despite all of the Celeste soundtrack kind of having this very, live piano sound to it, I'm a terrible piano player. Like, I'm not the best. A lot of the parts that I play are kind of very massaged from a live performance. I've tried my best when I've played it live to kind of rehearse as much as I can to actually play it as well as it sounds on the soundtrack after it's gone through so many passes of me editing things to make it sound perfect. But ultimately I'm not the best piano player. But I actually, it was a funny story that I'll tell while I am editing this stuff here, is I actually, when I was, because I played at the Game Awards last month, which was a surreal experience. But the conductor for the orchestra sent me an email just kind of like, asking me, what the best piece of music would be to play for the Game of the Year medley, and I sent over sort of a couple of options for the main melody, and they were asking if I wanted to play it, and I said yes, but also just to note, like, I am not very great at playing piano live. And I'm sorry, I'm just like failing to copy paste over here. Well, I can't talk and copy paste at the same time, apparently. I've found something out. But anyways, this is the worst ramble, I'm sorry. But he sent an email basically saying, like, that's the secret, like, none of us are really any good. We just kind of wing it. The exception, of course, is composers that are tremendous instrumentalists first and then go into writing music afterwards, and I feel very intimidated by those people. So I think I basically realized that the first one that I was playing here kind of sounded the best. And I'm going to quantize this a little bit, because luckily there is a triplet setting in the quantize, and we're just going to do that and see how that shakes out. Way better. And then I just copied and pasted the rest and moved the bass line down. So I'm going to set the same quantization here, and we've got this little line that is going to change over time. So what we need to do next is actually make it change. So if we go into the synth, we've got this parameter, and the fun secret thing that I found out, because there's so many things you can dive into on this side when you're kind of going into choosing what to automate in Ableton, and if you actually go into the synth and start just like moving the knob around, it actually automatically selects it for you over here. So that's fun tips if you are working in Ableton Live. And then I'm going to grab this and just make a very basic little curve here. Also saving the project, that's important to do often. Oh, that sounds terrible. The quantization didn't work. Oh, boy. Oh, I see where it went wrong. Oh, no. I'm just going to move things around. Cool. So, oops. Luckily, it messed up in the same spot both times. So I can just kind of jostle things around in the MIDI editor here. It's the best part because you get to see just how clumsy I am with computers and how often I just delete notes instead of moving them. And again, I need to point out that this is made far more difficult by the fact that I literally cannot hear very well up on stage, because I'm kind of just going by intuition at this point. And I don't actually like how this sounds when it is like super, super high up there, but then I realized I didn't put any reverb on it. All right, well, we got a little more density there. And I'm just gonna put some more effects on here, put a little flanger. I heard that. I'm just kind of lowering the volume a little bit here. Okay, so we don't need to listen through all of that. Another composition fun fact is when I'm writing music, I very often get lost in just listening to the same part over and over again, because I'm just like so in the mood of just kind of like, okay, just kind of sinking into the music, and I'll just kind of listen back over and over and not actually make any progress and waste a lot of time. I don't know what lesson to be learned is to be learned from all that, but that's just a fun fact of how I work. So I'm going to do one more thing here, and I was going to possibly bring in something that wasn't a synth, but I am realizing I just want another synth. So, or maybe I don't know. Let's see. Actually, let's bring in something that's not a synth, just to kind of break from my tried and true here. So we're going to go into Contact. I'm actually going to do a little violin thing, just really quick, for the melody. Maybe it'll sound terrible, who knows? But we're experimenting. So I have a whole lot of fun sample libraries in addition to just synth and stuff. Actually, prior to doing HackMud and Celeste, I actually worked almost exclusively with just live instruments. When I was working on Guild Wars 2, I did a whole lot of orchestral work and kind of getting back into that mode a little bit. But I guess I almost went for the piano. That would be very easy for me to do. But I'm actually going to drag a violin here and just do a little playable violin line. And then we all get to wait while it loads. I don't know if there's any fun anecdotes I can say while this loads. Sample libraries take a lot more hard drive space and memory, so it's a lot easier for me to write very quickly on the go with synths because they're just right there and you can kind of just do whatever you want with them. Sample libraries, I have this guy here. This is where everything lives. This is my, I don't know, it's like half a terabyte. It's not actually all that big, but I have a whole bunch of stuff on here. It's still loading. And so, I can fit maybe part of an orchestra onto here, but I actually need to get a new hard drive soon so I can I can get some more libraries loaded onto it. This really is just going to take a while, isn't it? Is there a mic around? Can someone ask questions while we wait for this load? We can just grab. There's so many mics. I guess we can send it around. Or you can just shout really loud, and I'll repeat the question for the room. Oh, there's a mic. Okay, cool. Why is this taking so long to load? Hello.
This one doesn't work.
Oh. We're improvising. This is also
this?
Right.
Oh wow, yeah.
Okay.
That's not... Question.
Questions.
So you were talking about
Yeah.
Like sonic qualities being like punchy or juicy or glassy.
Yeah.
I was curious, what sort of sonic qualities do you usually associate with like emotional themes like that? How do you like approach a video game and design for it?
I think, for emotional content in games, like there's sort of the tried and true, and then there's, you can try to subvert that a little bit. At least for working on Celeste, like the sort of glacier kind of, the very isolated piano sounds, the very just kind of shrill sort of pizzicato synths, like those sort of like bing, bang, those sorts of things. Like those are very kind of icy, a little more sort of sad, emotional kind of things. And then with warmer sounds, sort of the edges taken off them, like that can feel a little more like home, a little more just kind of reassuring. And that's why I like, for any sort of piece of music that is sort of a home base or something that's meant to be comforting, I always bring in a lot of bass and just kind of really just kind of, it's sort of like that fireplace sound of just kind of filling the space emotionally and just kind of letting you feel at ease. If you drop the bass out, like suddenly things feel a little more isolated. Just little psychoacoustic things that I like to play with in writing music. Another question?
Hello. Hi.
Oh, hey.
Just wondering, what are your personal disciplines and rituals for ideating and conceptualizing music? Like, is there like a particular time of week or day that you're like, I got to sit down and just hash out a bunch of stuff, or like what is it?
I wish I could categorize it to that degree. It's the unfortunate thing, and fortunate and unfortunate, I guess, with working freelance is that you're kind of thinking about writing music all the time. And so I could be like falling asleep and then immediately be like, oh shit, like here's a melody, and then need to kind of jot that down in some way. Or the best places that I come up with melodies actually are like if I'm showering or if I'm taking a walk. That's usually kind of when I'm just running things through my head constantly and like coming up with ideas. And it's really inconvenient because I can't actually, write those down. So like I'll have like a program on my phone or something to just kind of take an audio memo and like, sing to myself, or just sing it over and over and over in my head like constantly so I don't forget it. And then as soon as I'm back at my computer, then I'll, write it down, even if it's just kind of really shitty, like chicken scratch kind of piano playing or whatever, as long as the idea is preserved in some way. That's the most important thing, is like always having some method of preserving an idea when you have it, because it'll just kind of degrade over time and not be the exact idea that you had initially. And maybe sometimes that's still just as good. And maybe when you actually get to jot it down, it's actually not great. But the idea is to kind of verify as soon as you can, is this actually a good idea? And then if it is, then you've got it cataloged, there we go, and can actually kind of work with it. And I've got this loaded now. My octaves are all crazy. Let's see. It's also really, really soft. I cannot hear the violin at all. But if we actually want to just keep going with questions, I don't need to finish this piece of music right now. I've at least kind of showed some process, so we can kind of hold off on that and keep going with questions. Yes, hi.
I saw on your website you had a Celeste piano collections. Is that something that's coming out, and will there be a book?
So Celeste Piano Collections is a collaboration that I've been working on with Materia Collective and Trevor Gomes, who is an amazing pianist and streamer, as well as piano arranger. And we've been working on it for basically the past year, and it's finally coming out on Celeste's anniversary. I think it's the January 24th, something like that. So it's coming out this month. It's going to be CD form, vinyl, digital, and piano book. So you can actually get sheet music to play Trevor's arrangements. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. So that will be coming soon. And it's up for pre-order right now. If you just go to Materia Collective's Bandcamp page, you can check it out. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, out of all the songs you've ever written or helped write on, what was one that went through the most changes? Like,
Of any piece of music I've ever written, because that's
yes.
When I was first starting, probably I would constantly change things because I was never happy with them. And as I've kind of become a music professional, like I've kind of had to iterate less and kind of go more with my instinct and kind of, there's always the songs that just don't work, right? That you have to either toss out or refactor. There was, at least for the case of Celeste, the reflection was sort of one of the latter levels, right before sort of the big climactic boss fight. The music for that level kind of went through a whole lot of iterations because it was a very kind of emotionally raw moment in the story, and it was very difficult for me to kind of figure out what I wanted to write, as basically thinking of it as a prelude to the final boss fight. And so I started writing something. The very final sort of layer of that music was originally what I wrote as like my first draft of the boss fight, and I was like, this isn't like final boss enough. And so I kind of, took that back and kind of worked in that. And there's a lot of iterations of trying to figure out like what like confrontation music was for Celeste, since it's a game primarily without enemies and things to attack or whatever. It's not really a violent game, but then there's these moments where there's an actual confrontation, and sort of figuring out tonally where we wanted to take things was a very difficult process, but then eventually we got there. Yes.
For the fight with Battleline after falling from the mountain.
Yeah.
The music in that has that has like voices with it, and that's like the only time really in the game that has that. What was it that kind of made you want to break that like established kind of rule in bringing in those more natural sounding voices for that?
Cool. If you couldn't hear that, the question was about the choirs or the voices in the final confrontation with Battleline in Celeste, and that's just kind of that actually came from me just being a giant video game music nerd, and I'm a huge fan of Xenogears. If you know that soundtrack, Yasunori Mitsuda is like one of my idols, and so he used a heavy dose of Bulgarian women's choir in that soundtrack, and the final boss in that kind of brings together those choir sounds, and that's kind of been inspiring me since then, and so I've kind of 2 boss fights in a row now, I've included a Bulgarian women's choir sample library in that. So there's the final boss of Guild Wars 2, Heart of Thorns, also has the same choir in there, and I just kind of brought it back for Celeste because I wanted to keep indulging my own ego. But I love the sound of choirs. I grew up a singer, so if there's any chance for me to include vocals or choirs or anything, I always try to take it. Yes. Next. Hi.
I got here around halfway through, so this might be retreading old ground, but were there any game music pieces or other pieces of music that were particularly inspiring to you as like an emotional point for composing Celeste?
A lot of it really kind of just comes from a very wide range of inspirations for the music that I kind of grew up with, and are those emotional touch points for me. Since the game kind of drew a lot of inspiration in piano music, there's a lot of like classical and Baroque music that I won't go into naming all of because they would take forever. I studied a lot of classical music when I was, and also choral music, organ music when I was growing up because I sang in choirs, and so there's just like kind of a lot of that sort of classical, emotional, romantic music that kind of inspires me, and then the other side of things, like there's a lot of just electronic music, deep house, various kinds of trance, sort of music that has inspired me and sort of brings in the other side of sort of what mashed up to create Celeste. There's a lot of sort of things from all the different aspects of my upbringing in music. There's some jazz in there. There's just whole sort of a mishmash of all of the things that sort of inspired me as a composer.
Hey. So one of the coolest things for me about the Celeste soundtrack was after beating the main game and going to the B-sides and hearing all of these cool sounds that I've heard the whole way through the main game and hearing just this whole new remix of them in a new way. So my question is what was the process for doing those remixes, since I know it was like other composers, and so did you just kind of hand it off and say, go to town, have fun, or was it more collaborative? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that was really fun because from the idea of wanting to involve other composers to do remixes for the B-sides, it was kind of me crossing my fingers a bit because, prior to Celeste, no one really knew who I was a lot, and so I felt like I was just this huge nobody, and just kind of reaching out to a whole lot of friends, and then also people that I looked up to as composers, and being like, hey, do you want to work on this thing? And everyone said yes, which was amazing. And so really, I wanted to leave it up to them. I wanted to give them sort of the chance to express themselves in the game, and kind of take the source material for the level, and I kind of paired them up with the level that I thought best suit their sort of style that I knew that they could bring to it, and just kind of gave them as much as they wanted. So the MIDI or the stems from the original music, essentially just taking an entire level, all of the material, since it's all dynamic music, there's a lot to work with for some of the levels, and it's just here's everything, and come up with something, and express yourself, do something cool. Some of the composers even just kind of made their own sort of original material up, and didn't draw as much from the original levels, and I thought that was awesome. And so it was just really cool to kind of let them loose and see what they would come up with, and then put that in the game.
Hi. So could you talk a little bit more about the dynamic process of how the music kind of adapts to the gameplay, and how you worked, with the developers, and how, just from a technical level, you kind of got the stuff from Ableton into the game?
Yeah, on a technical level, it's a lot of just kind of working with the design process as it's coming together, and going into each level. We kind of treated each one as its own sort of individual, little cell that we were kind of working with in terms of how, what we wanted to do for dynamic music, what we wanted to do for how it would change over the course of the level, or if it wouldn't, or if it would go to different music or layers for cutscenes and that kind of thing. And so we would kind of sit down with each level and look at the mechanics, look at the story, the emotional arc of it, and just kind of architect out, from, before there's even any art in the level, just kind of figuring out, what do we want to do with this? What are we trying to get across with this? Is there some sort of mini game, in it that, like the fourth level with the feather, what are all the components that are making up this level, and just kind of setting the blueprint early so that we knew, okay, we're going to be working with 4 different dynamic layers, and here's the parameters for all of those. We worked with a middleware tool called Fmod, which is a pretty easy to use tool for just getting really sort of, simple dynamic music, and all of the audio was also going through there too. So it was kind of easy to work with the audio team to make all of the functionality that we wanted from both a gameplay and a musical perspective. Next question.
I was looking at a lot of these tools and finding them really fascinating. Is there, collegiate education aside, is there a good way to explore, get started with looking into creating this kind of digital music?
I feel like whenever I answer this question, it's kind of like my personal experience was just I like to just explore. I like to just kind of open a program and start investigating and seeing how things work. One of the cool benefits that I've had, learning how to work with synths and working with these programs is sometimes you can find whole project files that people have provided as for educational purposes, and you can open them up and kind of see, here's how everything's set up, here's how everything's laid out, here's how they've constructed their synths or whatever. And if you can find those sorts of resources, I don't have a specific link to any right now, but that's how I work best. Is I love going into something that's already been made and picking it apart and seeing how it works. And so that's kind of why I wanted to do this here, was just kind of to show here's how something is made from nothing, relatively speaking. And the sort of blog post that I wrote about how to make the synths for Celeste, I wanted to provide those resources to kind of get people started. And the first resource that I ever found for writing in Massive was actually Disaster Piece, Rich Veerland. He put together a presentation for how he made the synths for Fez, and so I was looking through that and kind of got inspired. I was like, oh, this is cool, and kind of went from that ground base of here's another composer has exposed how he works, and now I can kind of take that and build from that and learn how to find my own sort of voice within the same parameters.
Hey.
Hey.
First of all, thanks for talking about your process in a sort of messy and sort of sloppy way, and doing it live. And I know that's not easy, and I feel like that makes everything seem a lot more accessible and kind of affirming of the way I think a lot of us work. So thank you. I was wondering, I feel like a while back you tweeted about a professor who like maybe called you out for using too much reverb.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, like, since obviously you're still a fan of reverb, like how you found like the sweet spot, or if there was like an aha moment that like allowed you to use things a little more effectively.
Yeah, I've not backed down since college. What has changed, however, is how I use reverb. So the mistake that I made when I was in college, when I was younger and just learning electronic music from the get-go, was is basically kind of using. There's a difference between using reverb as a tool and using reverb as a kind of bandage to hide bad sounds. And I think the most important part is that the bass sounds that you're working with are good as they are, and reverb kind of is a tool to saturate the sound. You have to kind of know what you're doing with reverb. You have to be aware of like what sort of sonic space you're creating, because so much reverb creates all of this resonance, and everything else that you're layering on top of it is going to interact with that resonance in some way. And so if you're creating all of these conflicts, it's going to sound muddy and messy and just kind of bleh, technical term. And if you kind of go into it knowing just like how much you're using, and also like keeping as much of the raw signal as possible, kind of pushing the reverb farther into the background, letting it kind of be, sort of a halo glow around it rather than being just a fog in your face. That's kind of the way that I've changed how I've used reverb. My old project files, I can't go back to them. It's really bad. I made the mistake once of doing a sort of remastered version of a live performance that I recorded, and I just ended up like tweaking the EQ and putting reverb on it, and my professor was just like, "What did you do?" I was expecting something more, and yeah, I should have done something more. So yeah, just being aware of what you're doing and what sort of sonic space you're creating with all the effects that you're using, is sort of how to mature your use of those effects.
Hi. So first thing I wanted to ask was, I've heard it both ways. Is it Lena or Lena?
Lena.
Okay.
Where are you? I don't know where you are.
I'm over here.
Oh, hey. Hi.
So my main question is that I've heard a lot of discussions online from people who know a lot more about like music theory in general, kind of talking about how when you made the music for Celeste, it resolves very nicely with this kind of idea of like anxiety, 'cause certain pieces will like kind of not resolve, and then they'll keep adding and adding and adding. It never seems like it comes down until you get maybe to the next song. So you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, saying like, oh, you just sort of play around with stuff until you feel like it sounds or works. How much of the music in the game do you think is like purposefully made to be like that way? Like, did you actually sit down and put thought, like I purposely want it to kind of resolve like this, or just kind of built on top of that?
When I'm writing music, especially for a game, like I always kind of have the structure of the level in mind. I think writing music, especially music that loops, is a difficult prospect because, you have to kind of know what the actual structure of the music is. A music loop for a video game is only as much as it is sort of something that's suspended in space, and any sort of piece of music in a game, if it just kind of like fades out or cuts, then that feels to our ears like an incomplete piece of music, right? It's kind of what we've trained ourselves to listen for when we're playing games. Like you play, a level of something and you have something that's just looping, and then suddenly something else plays. But I think the way that I like to think about music when I'm writing it for a game is I know that eventually this music has to end. And whether that's through some sort of fade out, whether it's through a transition into something else, those are all considerations that I wanted to make. So, for example, like the end of level tracks, I always knew that those were going to come out of something. And because it was always the same track, I knew it was going to have to blend in with X number of levels that were all going to be ending. And so that's kind of the end of these pieces that I was writing. Everything kind of ended in the end of level music. And so the way that it comes out, like maybe it doesn't come directly from the key that the level's playing in, but it kind of, the way that it's composed, it kind of like, dun dun dun. It's like that's just kind of building chord, just kind of like, it could come from anything. It's sort of built so that it's sort of a, bridging the gap between something that's kind of either fading out or kind of getting lower in intensity. A lot of the levels kind of like strip things back down so it's just the piano, and so it makes that transition easier. So there's just those little considerations for how the pieces transition and end. And I think that's, especially for games that have dynamic music implementation, that's like a stronger way to do things. And a lot of, big AAA games also, kind of do that they have a lot more kind of dynamic music at play, and there's a lot of endings that have been written into, combat loops or whatever, where like, combat ends, then the intensity level, decreases and is dun 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 dun, and like whatever, there's like, some sort of big drum fill or something. Those are all kind of considerations of how to end a piece of music. But you really can't do that without dynamic music. So it's always kind of like, do you have the technology? If you do, then let's do it properly. I've been told in giant impact font to wrap it up. So if there's one more question, I can take that, and then I'll wrap it.
This is very cool. Hi.
Hello.
So first of all, I'm really bad at keeping up with music annually. So thank you for your post about the best music 2018 that you like, because that really helped me go through some stuff to find, because I'm bad at finding it. I really liked Escape. I thought it was really neat. I was wondering how you did you like conceptualize like, I think you did all of it, right? It wasn't, the whole music. Did you conceptualize the whole thing like in one go, or was it like, did you decide, hey, I'm making kind of like this journey, should I make this into a whole thing, a whole project instead, or?
Sorry, the question, what was that about specifically? Like
about Escape, your...
oh, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, Escape, the interactive novel I did, it all started as the text. I wrote that first, like years and years and years ago, without really knowing it was going to be an interactive piece of fiction. And so that structure already existed. And then from the moment I wanted to adapt it into an interactive, sort of audiovisual thing, I took a look at all of the writing and the sort of the moods that it kind of goes through and the recurring themes, and did kind of what I would do for any other game project, which is sort of what are the commonalities, what are the things I can reuse, and sort of what are the pieces that I need to create for this. And so I kind of became my own client in a way, and so I was tasking myself with figuring out what the best things to score for the project were. So I was kind of switching hats a lot and just kind of yelling at myself and setting deadlines and not upholding them, and then being really angry at myself again, and full production. So yeah, thank you so much for everyone for coming by. This was a lot of fun. We didn't write a whole lot of music, but I hope you learned something along the way. And if you have any other questions, if you want me to sign something, I have a signing session down at 4 at the signing area thingy. So come by, say hi, and I'll be around. So thank you.